How old was he?
His dad was only in his 40s. And I think he was 47 because Bill always worried when he got 47. If he made it past that, he'd be fine, he thought. But it's the one that shook him up the most because he was the closest, I think, to his father. And it was always... So he took it quite hard.
And you were pregnant at the time?
I was pregnant with you, and we went back for the funeral. And then he had to work with his mother on what they were going to do. And if she was going to get a job someplace. And I think, well, Uncle Bill, that was his brother. That was his father's brother. And they were there for that funeral. And that might have been the time that Uncle Bill told her she could come to Texas and work with him in their laundry business and whatever business they had. And I don't know if how soon they did that, but they did move.
So how and when and where was your third child born?
Well, that was another experience because we're still in the ranch and I'm washing clothes and I'm having to lift these big things with water to empty them, and my water broke. I knew you were due. And so I had to get the lady in the next door to find Bill. He was out in the ranch. Get him home so we could go to the hospital. And he rushed back, changed clothes, and we got in the car and started out for McCook.
How far was that?
50 miles, close to that. But we're hitting these cattle gates. And cattle gates are in the road that keeps the cattle from roaming out. And he'd hit those cattle gates hard. And we got to the hospital, just drove in, and the nurses came out and helped me in. And as soon as I got in there, you were born. Bill took the car to the garage. He had 2 flat tires. And by the time he got back, you were born. And so that meant then I had to go back. Well, in the meantime, my parents came and took the other 2 kids back. And then my dad came back and did some work in the house, put the electricity in. And that's when Bill got thrown from a horse and it threw the vertebrae out of the back. And he went to the doctor and he said, well, the only way is if you had an operation. Either that or he said, you'll have to give up what you're doing because you're not going to get any better.
So how did you end up moving to Iowa?
Oh, that was a long time.
Long time?
Going to Iowa. We moved then back. He decided then he'd go back to teaching. He could do that. And he got a job at Eagle, which is right outside of Lincoln. And we moved then. Well, he found us a place to live in Bennett first. And then we moved into Eagle, which was next to the high school, next to the school, and lived there a few years. And it was then he decided teaching was not going to be the profession he wanted to be in. And so his friends from college all had other business jobs. And so he decided to go to the Prudential Mortgage Loan Department, and they hired him to work 6 counties in Iowa. So he left to go to Fort Dodge to find us a place to live. And he went to Carroll, and he wanted me to come for a weekend so we could go look for places to rent. And I took the bus then, and his grandma came to stay with the kids. And I took the bus then to Carroll, and we drove around in Fort Dodge and found a place to rent. And then we moved then into Fort Dodge. And that's where Cindy started school. And we built a house. I was still doing art lessons and drew out a plan for a house, split level house, and so we built that. He was working and doing very well in the mortgage loan business. And so we lived in this split level house, and then he got into realty business. He got his realty license, and he would sell this house, and we'd buy another one and move into that and sell that one, and we got another one. So there was a lot of moving back and forth in those few days.
Where your fourth child and fifth child were born
in Fort Dodge. And Doug, I can't remember when he was born. We were still living down in the rental house, right?
55.
And then I got pregnant before he was a year old. So and Jody was born. And you had to go in the hospital for hernia operations. And I stayed with you long enough till you knew that I was back, because you had to go to kindergarten. You were going to kindergarten then. And then Jody was born. The doctor never made that one. She was fast. And so Bill always thought it was funny. He got 2 into the hospital and took 3 out. And we lived then in Fort Dodge until 1960.
And how did you get moved to Lake City?
And Bill was traveling all around, and in the summertime he kept telling me, well, I'm going to have to play golf, because every time I'm going to these business people, there's nobody there. The banks are the people in the banks are not there. They're all on the golf course. So he said, I think I'm going to have to learn how to play golf. So he went to Sears and bought a set of golf clubs and a bag. And he went out to this little golf course to hit balls to see if he would be able to play against these other guys. And he probably took a few lessons from the pro there and played a few games there, and he said, I think maybe I could play this game. And so he started out playing. Then he could meet the guys on the golf course and really got well acquainted a lot more, and they seemed to like him. And that's when the guy at at Lake City, they had a nice little 9-hole golf course. And this guy, they seemed to like him and asked him if he would like to work in the bank. And he had stipulations that, yeah, he would if he could be able to work up. You know, and I think they hired him then as the vice president or something, and so he wanted to work up.
Didn't he want to buy into as a partner as well?
Yeah. And so there were 3 partners at that time, and one lived in Carroll, and one was in Lake City, and one was in Lorville. And the guy in Lorville he liked very well, and he then sold him his rights to the bank, and we paid it off in payments. And he then owned his share of the bank that way, and then worked his way up into being.
So what was life like in Lake City?
Lake City was a fun place, small town, easy for the kids to get around. They had a little golf course, but it had sand greens, and I'd never heard of those, because after Bill got pretty good with his golf, he decided he needed better clubs. So I got the Sears clubs. And so we did play in Fort Dodge. And we then even joined that one last summer at the country club, and we played there a lot. And they had a swimming pool, so that worked out. And so we were always playing on grass greens, never heard about sand greens. But Bill then worked with some other people in Lake City to build grass greens. And they got somebody then, you know, to help them plan this. And then they put in the grass greens. And so we then continued to play in that golf course.
Your middle child remembers helping lay the grass on the grass
Okay.
greens.
Yes, you worked there. Well, you lived there. I would say you lived there most of the time. But as we, you know, first moved there, I would take you guys out with me to play golf. And I would play like 9 holes, walk, pull my cart. And Bill threw his clubs a few times, because I always told him.
Bill Jr.?
Yes.
Bill Jr.?
Yes.
Okay.
Young Bill. And I'd send him back to the car. That if you can't keep it. So, I mean, we did that a few times.
Well, you lived in Lake City about 30 years.
Yes, we were there from 60 to 90.
Busy time?
It was an extremely busy time. We did have a foreign student. It was the second year after we lived in Lake City.
What was her name?
Marcel Banduet from Costa Rica. And they came to me, the AFS people, new in town, we were new in town, and they thought, you know, would you be willing to house a foreign student for a year? And I thought, I already had 5. And so Bill and I talked it over, and I said, well, sure, I think it'd be good education, and we could handle that. Well, then they sent us the information that we'd have this foreign student from Costa Rica. And we went to Lincoln to meet her, not Lincoln, but to Des Moines on the airport, and all these foreign students came in. And then we had to have her name so she knew where to go. And she knew some English, but not much. And she did, Cindy was with us, and I don't know who else. I don't know if you went with us down there. But Cindy went, because Cindy was going to have to be her lazy-on
So
person.
you had 6 children.
Yeah, we now had 6. I moved you guys down the basement. You know, it was pretty bad, even through the winter. But there was one shower down there. And then she got the one room. She had never had a room by herself either. And it was really fun having her and going to the different meetings with her. And she told me afterwards she learned the most English through Doug and Jody, watching TV. They would watch TV together, and then they would tell her different things, what was going on. And so that's how she learned her English.
Well, early on in Lake City, Doug had a fall.
Yes. Doug and Jody usually could roam anywhere in town. But they had this friend who just lived a block away, and they would like to go play with him. Well, they were in their garage. They had a loft up above, and there was a bicycle sitting up there. And Doug got up there on that loft and decided to sit on that bicycle, and the bicycle tipped him right over, and he went headfirst into that concrete floor. And you guys were playing out in the yard, and somebody ran home and told us, because Bill was home too, and he got in the car and drove, and Bill was driving, young Bill was carrying him.
Well, you know, Bill and another friend were carrying, and I was walking right beside him.
Carrying him, and Bill was in the car, so they put him in the car and took him right to the hospital. And the doctor happened to be in there with the nurse. And so they took him in right away. And then I don't know if I walked up there, if I went in another car, but I got up there. And I can remember the two of us standing at the end of the bed. And they're working on Doug so he wouldn't swallow his tongue.
So Doug was about 5 years old?
Yeah, 4 or 5. It was quite young. He had a skull fracture from this side to this side. And they were working on him because it was the blood that was going through the brain. And it was evidently so strong. He struggled so hard. And evidently it was trying to swallow the tongue. And they were constantly pushing into his mouth. And we're standing at the end of the bed. We're thinking maybe, this is going to be it. And they got him through that until he settled down. And they said, it's going to be a long haul because that fracture has to heal. And I would come and visit him every day and stay with him. And he was black and blue all through his face, his eyes. And I asked him one time if he wanted to see a picture of himself, if I could hold a mirror up to it. No, he didn't really want to do that.
He made a complete recovery?
And he made a big, but he had to be bedridden. So we got a crib to put downstairs in one of the rooms, and he slept in that. He wasn't supposed to be playing roughhouse with anybody. He wasn't even supposed to be going out riding on his bike or his whatever. So it was actually a year that we had to watch him. And he made a complete recovery from that.
Now, Jody was the pet person.
The pet person, yes. Every pet that she could find. And
what were the two favorite pets?
Well, Barney. Barney the dog, Andy the cat. And she had a whole mess of kittens. She had a whole bunch of female cats at one time, and that one had a batch of kittens, and I made her give them away. Well, that's her story. We had to take them up to Fort Dodge. And she kept the two, Andy and Dino. But Dino ran away. Andy, I think, chased him away, but she kept Andy. And Andy was the one we trained how to ring a bell so he could get his food. Yes.
So you saw a lot of sporting events?
Sporting events, yes.
Football, basketball, baseball?
Everything. We tried to break it up so one would go to one set of games and I'd go to another set of games because you guys were in everything. And Cindy was a cheerleader. And so it was coming and going all the time. And there was always a pot of soup or something on the stove. Because whenever they'd come through the house, they ate and left again. So that's how we had to manage. But we managed to try to get to every game.
So when did snowmobiling take place?
The snowmobiling started when Joe Swanson bought one. And he started...
Friend of the family.
Yeah, Joe and Pam were our best friends, sort of like they adopted us. And he bought it, so we started riding his snowmobile. And one time we went out to a park out by Lorville, and they would take turns riding. What other person had a snowmobile? I don't know who it was. But they'd take turns riding that one snowmobile. And Bill went over one big hump and he hit a tree and broke his leg.
Well, shattered his leg.
Oh, I mean, it really shattered. If he hadn't have had a boot, snow boot on, it would have taken it off. And those guys, Joe was big, Jim was big, all those big guys picked him up, carried him to the car, and we raced into Lake City. and the doctor happened to be in there too. And they worked on his leg all night. The doctor told me later he had to do it twice. He had to put the cast on, and then when they run the x-ray through it, it didn't match. Took it back off and did it again. And so he was in that cast for a year. But then we bought snowmobiles. So he bought one for himself. And then I got one too. And the whole group of us went up to Okoboji. The whole lake is frozen over. And we stayed in this one cabin. We all had cabins. And we went to every bar across the lake. And Bill in his crutches. So the guys would just pick him up, bring him in the bar, bring him back out. And one time they pulled up on the snowbank and he said, well, I'll do it myself. And he went like this and the crutches went way down into the snowbank. But they just picked him up and carried him in.
So tell me about the riverboat trip down the Mississippi.
Well, the riverboat is one Dad planned. He did this. He wanted to take the whole family on a trip. Before, we'd only take some of you at a time. So he wanted to do a riverboat trip, and he ordered it all up, maps of the river. He knew he had the whole set of maps, and he had them enlarged some way on a big thing. So he knew every curve of the river. And then Cindy was in college, and she was at Cedar Falls. And so we drove to pick her up, and I'm packing all this stuff, and I made all the recipes that we were going to be eating, and packed up all our food, and we had to have 2 cars because we had all that stuff. And so we got walkie-talkies between the cars because we didn't have this magic stuff. So we had walkie-talkies between the cars to know where we were going to stop for lunch.
And that was about 1969, wasn't it?
I guess. I remember the year. But we got to Cindy's, and we stayed overnight then with her, and took off then the next day to go to, well, we picked up the boat at Dubuque. We picked up the boat there.
For a week?
And so I'm unloading, from the cars, 2 cars into the boat, and so we had all of our crap.
What was it like cruising down the Mississippi?
It was really one of the best vacations we had. And everybody had a job. And we played a lot of games. And I run across the Yahtzee set, and it's still there. All those games were still in that box. It's in my closet. So we played a lot of games. We did a lot of fishing, swimming, and cruising up and down the Mississippi.
And who captained the boat most of the time?
Doug. Doug did drive the boat. He found his calling, and he loved that. And but he wouldn't let him park it or pull into he wanted him to, but he could go all the way wherever he needed to go in the river, and he had a blast.
Well, y'all had bought a motor home at some point.
We bought the motor home after you guys were gone, and this was our way then to come to Texas to visit, and also it was to do trips the 2 of us would take camping. And we went to College View, Council Bluffs, went to Council Bluffs where they had these motorhome. So we tried out 2 or 3 different ones. And I would ride in the back, and he would, you know, with the guys, and they would drive it. And we would tell which ones rode the best. And so then we decided which one we liked, and then we got the motorhome.
What did you use it for?
Mostly just to camp out and to drive to Texas. We drove to football games.
So you went
And that was one of the football games. We went to Iowa City. You guys were still in college. And we had at least 12 to 14 people in that. And sometimes Joe would be driving, and some of the other guys. I don't know if Dad drove a lot of it on those trips. But we would stop at some of the rest stops, and it was always, everybody has to go whether you have to go or not. And so these were always fun trips, but there was one of them that kind of scared us because it thought we had a fat tire and thought that it wasn't driving. We thought, what would happen if we had an accident and all these people in there that you're responsible for? It was a lot of mess because I cleaned it up before and I'd have to clean it up after it was all done. And it was fun though. We came down here to Texas, and we went then all the way down to the valley. And once we got there, we said, wow, this is a nice place. And it was warm and the flowers were blooming. And so we decided to sell the motorhome and buy a camper and park it on one of the lots.
down in the valley.
That was down in Texas, and the first place was in, I'm trying to think of the town. No, it's in McAllen. It was the next one over.
Down there somewhere.
Yeah, we played those golf courses up and down the whole valley. We stayed though after we sold the other one, and we decided, there's no use keeping that, and we would just rent when we came down.
Tell me a little bit about Nebraska football.
Oh, Nebraska football started when we were in high school, and we would both go to football games on Saturday because Nebraska football was big time because it's the only thing we had in the state. And they would have high school, the boys would sit on one end and the girls on the other end, and it was cost you 25 cents to get in. And we would take carloads of us to go to the football games. So we started quite early being fans of the football and of all the players and whatever. So once even while we were in school there, of course, we went. And then not that much once he was working, and we was out in Curtis. It was too far to go. But the thing is, the football team practiced at the little town where we were, because that was like a little college. They stayed there and they practiced. So we knew all the players before they ever got on the team. So Bill thought that was great. And so football started, and we would go ever so often when he could get tickets after we moved to Fort Dodge. And then when we moved to Lake City, he decided he wanted to be a member so that he could have tickets. And he wrote letters to the people in charge of the ticket office. And some of the craziest letters he would write. And they got such a kick out of his letters that they figured they ought to be able to give us seats. So they gave us 2 seats, front row, at the stadium on the south side. So that we had our season tickets for like 5, 6 years maybe. And we still had the motorhome first time we went down, and we would park in that. And then after that, sometimes we'd just go down and back in the same day. And until he got, so he wasn't feeling good about driving.
But when Bill retired from the bank, didn't you move to Carroll?
Yeah, we moved to Carroll in 1990. And yeah, there was a lot of, I don't know if I want to talk about all the times that went on in the bank, but he decided I wanted him to move down here.
Where?
In Salado.
Texas.
Because the more we would come down here and we'd stay, we already had the little unit on number 29. And I said, we ought to buy a place here. And he just wasn't ready. He liked to go back in the summer. He still tried to do this management, farm management. And it got so bad that he couldn't even handle it anymore. And the last time he was still in the hospital, I had to finish the report to send.
What did y'all like about Salado, Texas?
Well, we liked this. I didn't like it at first. I thought we needed a bigger place, but because I'd always lived in places that you had to drive to someplace else to go. Movies, went out to eat, but here you could eat out. And I liked the golf course. I liked the people. I liked the smallness of it. And so we would stay longer and longer and longer. We stayed for maybe like starting out 2 weeks, and then it would be a month. And I think the longest we actually stayed here was 3 months. Well, the longest was when he got sick.
Well, about in 2001, his health got bad and went to the hospital. What happened there?
Yes, he had an aneurysm. Well, we were in the unit, and I was on the computer, and he came back from someplace, and he said, I don't know, I just don't feel right. He laid on the bed, and he said, you know something, I can't even feel my legs. And I said, I think I need to call the emergency. He was thinking about some doctor something to call, and I said, no, I just think if you're feeling that bad, I think we need to have you. So I called, and they came to pick him up.
So what happened when you went to the
I went up to the Scott and White Hospital emergency room, and they started doing tests on him. And I drove up behind the ambulance, and I was watching. They was doing this sonar system on his stomach, and it was on a TV there, and I could see there was one area that was all dark, black. And the nurse that was doing the testing, she didn't say anything to us, but she kept going back to this same place. And then when the doctor came in, he told her what it was, and he said, you need an operation.
So what happened? What happened during the operation and afterwards?
Well, the operation was long, and they had to do it 3 times, 2 more times, because the aneurysm was so big that it had touched some of the other organs and the pancreas, and the pancreas started to leak, so it had to go in again. And he told him the last time he did it, he wanted to be out completely before they did the other system. And so then they had this big open operation, and that had to heal from the inside out. So they had to change all these bandages. They then moved him to the Santa Fe rehab hospital. And so he was in that from February until June. No, we got to come home after I finally yelled at the doctor. I was saying was then helping change the bandages.
Is that Dr. Buckley?
Dr. Buckley.
What did Bill call him?
Wild Bill. Well, he called him Wild Bill.
Bad News Buckley?
Bad News Buckley. But, and we were in Santa Fe, and I was learning how to change the bandages, you know, because they would have to do this. But they needed to have nursing here at home. And as long as we could get that at home, we didn't have to stay there. So I got upset with the doctor because he wasn't coming out there often enough. So I got his telephone number and I called. And he was in an operation room doing an operation. And the nurse was telling him, well, it's this lady and she's mad. And he came that night and he walked in, he said, well, have you cooled off yet? And I said, well, I don't know. I'll see when you decide if we can go home. And just to Salado. And I said, well, I can take care of this if we can just get back there.
So later, Cindy came down and you drove back to
Well,
Iowa.
yes, it was after then that he kept telling us how he was developing, you know, and moving along. Still, the bandages needed to be changed. But we had a doctor he could go to, his doctor back in Carroll. And so he gave us a date that in June that we could go back. And then but my driver's license had lapsed. So she decided it wasn't safe for me to drive him back. She came down to drive us back. And Bill then laid in the back seat. And he was, you know, improving, getting better. But still, I couldn't keep him from the cigarettes.